thank you all for being with us here today, especially during Pollinator Week. We're both really excited to talk to you today about not just how to create habitat for pollinators and all of the other amazing invertebrates that you can find in your habitat, but how to actually stop and learn about who's actually living in that pollinator garden. So hopefully this will be useful to everyone, no matter where you are in your pollinator journey. And I do want to quickly note, if this is your first webinar with Xerces, first of all, welcome. We've been around since 1971 working to protect wildlife through the conservation of invertebrates in their habitat. And our name is a reference to the Xerces blue butterfly, which is believed to be the first American butterfly to go extinct due to human development. It used to live in the coastal sand dunes around the San Francisco Bay Area. And there's an image on this slide of a Xerces blue specimen. And I do want to quickly acknowledge and thank all of these Xerces Society supporters, because without them, we couldn't do the work that we do, and their support really is so important. And on that note, I do want to add that we are a donor-supported nonprofit. So if you aren't already a member and you're at all interested, our membership link is here. You'd be joining a group of people who are really passionate and committed to protecting invertebrates. And again, we really rely on our members to do the work that we do. So thank you to everybody here who's a member. We do a variety of on-the-ground conservation work. We have programs focusing on pollinators and agricultural biodiversity, endangered species, pesticide reduction, and we also do a lot of community engagement work in residential communities. We do research. We really work in all sorts of areas to try to address invertebrate conservation with a lot of different intersecting strategies. Okay, so why bring back the pollinators and other invertebrates? As many of you are likely already aware, there's been many recent studies that are documenting declines in insect populations worldwide, including many pollinators like bees and butterflies. There was a study published last year with a few Xerces scientists as co-authors that found that over the past 20 years in the United States, there's been a 22% decline in overall butterfly abundance, which is obviously very concerning. And we know enough to know that it's really essential to take action to conserve pollinators and other invertebrates. Luckily, we can all be part of the solution. We can all be a part of protecting pollinators. This is something that's really exciting for me, being somebody who works a lot in residential and urban spaces. I've seen really tiny postage stamp yards just packed with native bees and butterflies and other really cool insects. And our Xerces Bring Back the Pollinators program breaks pollinator conservation into 4 really easy steps, which are just grow pollinator-friendly flowers, provide nesting sites, avoid pesticides, and spread the word with friends and neighbors. So a quick plug, if you haven't already, I'd really encourage you to sign our Pollinator Protection Pledge. You'll receive a quarterly e-newsletter from us with new resources and opportunities, and be linked into this broader community of people who are committed to protecting pollinators. And you can check it out at bringbackthe.pollinators.org. And now I'll turn it over to Jennifer.
Thanks, Aaron. All right, today we're going to be talking about different roles of insects that are in your space. We're going to learn about prominent groups of helpful insects. We're going to talk about ways to monitor them on different scales and whatever time and capacity you have. And then we're going to end by talking about ways you can support insects in your space and beyond. All right, so insects play many different roles in our ecosystems. There are herbivores that eat plants, and they are able to consume plants and then transfer that energy to other wildlife that eat them. Not all animals can process plants, for example, and so herbivores do play this really key step between turning plant energy into energy for other animals. They also help keep different plant populations in check too, and that's a valuable role in ecosystems. You're very familiar with the role of pollinators. They make it possible for flowering plants to reproduce. So wild plants, and then also, of course, they're important in crop production. There are many insects that contribute to soil health. This means that they are moving soil, moving nutrients, allowing air and water to reach deeper soil layers, enhancing the production of soil for wild plants and for crop plants too. There are predators. These keep other animals in check of all sizes. And then there are insects that help filter water in lakes and rivers and ponds and are really important for water quality. And then all these insects are food for other wildlife, for other arthropods or for vertebrates of all sizes. And all of this work that these insects are doing occurs in natural areas, and it also occurs in your space. So they're playing an important role whether you are gardening for food or for aesthetics. They're enhancing the productivity of your garden through pollination and soil health and through pest control. And then they're supporting wildlife as well. So if you enjoy songbirds in your neighborhood and enjoy hearing the songs at 5 a.m., that is due to the power of insects. And they really, really are the things that are running our world. All this work that we see is also important to our economy as well. So they're contributing significant amounts of um, ecosystem services that are worth billions of dollars for pollination of crops, for pest suppression in crops, for decomposition. And beyond agriculture, they support a really critical recreation industry and tourism industry as well. So economically, they are contributing billions every single year, supporting help not only keeping us healthy, but really keeping our economy healthy too. Insects also inspire wonderment and amazement, and just independently of all the things that they do for us, they have their own intrinsic value as well. So, as Aaron mentioned, we get to talk about all the insects in your habitat today. And where can you find insects? Really, you can find insects everywhere because they live everywhere that people do and places that people cannot. But when you're talking about looking in your space, there's really four main places to look in order to see the most common groups that you're going to encounter. Those are on flowers, where insects are going to collect pollen and nectar as energy and as protein. There are also many different insects that are on vegetation, either eating the plants and leaves themselves and stems or hunting the insects that are eating the plants. You can find them within the soil or within the leaf layer on top of the soil. And you can also find them inside other insects. So we'll talk about all those different places as we go, but I'm going to run through some groups of common insects you can see in pollinator habitat. And up in the corner here, these little boxes are going to help you identify where you can find them easily in your space. We're going to start with herbivores, and specifically with cicadas, which are just personally one of my favorite groups of insects. These are herbivorous insects, and the larva, um, the adult will lay an egg on a plant and then will hatch into a nymph, excuse me, the immature phase of the nymph. The nymph will crawl down under the soil to find plant roots and then will feed off of those plant roots, drinking the plant sap. Across the United States, there are species of cicadas that emerge each year, each summer. You might be familiar with the dog day cicadas, which come out in August and make this extremely loud chorus, which I can hear in my head, but I won't reproduce here. Um, and these annual cicadas feed for a year or two before emerging as adults. So they dig back up through the soil, they find a place to attach, and then they molt, shedding behind that little cicada case and emerging as an adult. The adults don't tend to feed on plants. They really just find a mate, reproduce, and then die. So annual cicadas are common across the United States, but in the central states and in the east, we also have periodical cicadas, and these are cicadas that live underground for either 13 or 17 years. And then they emerge en masse at 13 years or 17 years, and depending on the brood, that means that there's some sort of periodical cicada emerging across this region every single year. So they're clearly able to tell time, so they can all emerge at once and sort of flood the zone. We don't really know how they can count the years that pass. They might be able to count the pulses in plant sap. It's a mystery for now of nature, but it's truly, truly amazing. And cicadas are an important food source for birds, for mammals, for other insects. And they also do play a role in soil health because they create these channels that help water and air move to deeper soil layers and roots as well. Next up are more herbivores. These are leaf hoppers. This is a very diverse group of plant feeders. And like cicadas, they have piercing, sucking mouth parts and they feed on plant sap. These feed above ground on stems and leaves, and they feed on a wide variety of plants. There's at least one plant leaf hopper that feeds on the major plants in all terrestrial ecosystems. So it's a really diverse group, and they can be sometimes very plant specific. You can see that they have these intricate patterns. So from far away, they can look really drab and blend in, but up close, they can be very intricate in coloration, or they can just be very bright and not attempt to blend in at all. Leafhoppers have a byproduct of consuming all that plant sap. They produce honeydew. This is like a watery, sugary, sticky secretion, and ants love it to consume it. So they will actually guard leafhoppers while leafhoppers are feeding so that they can eat the honeydew, and that helps the leafhoppers face less predation. Our next group of herbivores are hawk moths, and these are also known as hummingbird moths. They're lepidoptera, so they're relatives of butterflies, and their larval stage, the caterpillar stage, is the herbivorous stage. Some butterflies and moths feed on just a few species of plants or a group, like a genus or even family of plants. This group of moths feeds on a lot of things. So multiple plant families. And once a caterpillar reaches this really giant, juicy stage, it will form a cocoon. And in some areas, they have multiple generations of growing season, but they'll overwinter in the fall in this cocoon within the leaf layer. When they emerge as an adult, which you can see up above, they look a lot like hummingbirds. And the way that they hover in front of flowers, it's really easy to mistake them as hummingbirds too. So they extend this really long tubular tongue to extract nectar from flowers. And, some moths don't feed as adults, they just mate and then die. But hawk moths do collect nectar, and they're active drinking nectar, some species during the day and then others at dusk and at night. And because they do have this long tubular tongue, they have actually co-evolved over time tight relationships with some plants. And so they are really essential pollinators of some native plants. So for example, the Missouri evening primrose, which opens up at dusk, is visited by a bunch of different species of bees and other animals, but it's the hawk moths that are really valuable at pollinating it because their long tongue means that their face brushes up against the anthers and they collect pollen and then just deposit it in very efficiently. So anyway, there's a lot of really interesting plant pollinator relationships with hawk moths. Moving into other pollinators that you can find in your pollinator garden, it's not a surprise that you can find a lot of bees. Bees are really frequent visitors to flowers. They are drinking the nectar for energy. The females are actively gathering pollen to bring back to their nests to provide for their young. You've probably heard the phrase busy like a bee, and that's just a really accurate phrase because female bees, when they're building a nest and provisioning a nest, are really putting in long days. It takes them somewhere between 15 to 35 trips to collect enough pollen and nectar just to feed one larva. So every day they're lifting 2 to 3 times their body weight in floral resources to take back to their nest. And most bees are solitary, so it's just one individual female that's creating her own nest and providing for her young. These bees might have just one generation of growing season, so they're only out a certain time of the year, or some species have multiple generations. So they're out in the spring, out in the summer, and then one more generation in the fall. There are also social bees in which there are annual colonies that form. So they are initiated in the spring by a mated queen, and then wrap up in the fall with only the queens overwintering. And um, those social colonies just have one female that reproduces, and then the rest of the colony works collaboratively to support the colony as a whole. So those are species like bumblebees, for example, and then there are a number of sweat bees also that have this social lifestyle or semi-social, somewhere on the spectrum of sociality. Most bees live underground, so they build shallow nests or more often deeper nests that are 1 to 3 feet or even more in the soil. Those that live above ground will use pithy stems or hollow stems or other crevices, snail shells, rocks, all sorts of things to build small nests in. And then bumblebees use insulated cavities, so places that are going to protect their colony and keep it warm when they start their colony in the spring. So things like insulated bunch grass or old bird nests or old rodent nests, anything with just, or man-made structures inside a brick wall or overturned flower pot, that kind of thing. Relatives of bees, close relatives, are hunting wasps, but instead of feeding their young pollen, hunting wasps give their young protein in the form of other insects. And so hunting wasps also build nests, most of them underground, some of them above ground in tunnels, or they use mud on plants to create really beautiful pots or on the sides of buildings. I'm sure you've seen those. Um, and like most bees, most hunting wasps are solitary, so they're not defensive of their nest or aggressive, because if they defend their nest, then they risk losing their life and then not being able to reproduce. So that's contrary to social wasps like paper wasps or yellow jackets, in which there are enough individuals within that colony that they can defend their nest and they have all these resources collected there, so they are aggressive in defending it. Most solitary wasps have really preferred prey, so they'll choose caterpillars or grasshoppers or crickets or beetle grubs, for example. Japanese beetles just emerged in my yard, um, but we do also have the scarab beetle hunting wasp that you see in the lower picture there too. So they can be pretty efficient in hunting their preferred prey. The adults are on flowers, they drink nectar, so you can easily find wasps that way. And this is a group that plays really important roles as pollinators in soil health and as pest control. And similarly, playing similar multiple important roles are flower flies. Um, this group is predaceous as larvae, or some are decomposers, and it got cut off a little bit here, but the critter you see in the bottom picture holding the aphid is a flower fly larva that's avid hunters of aphids, even though they're so tiny and legless. They're really good at hunting them down and eating them. They also eat eggs of other insects, um, many other things that are feeding on plants. And then some larvae are decomposers in the soil too. The adults are found on flowers, drinking nectar, sometimes eating pollen for protein, and they overwinter in the soil and leaf layers. So that permanent habitat where that is undisturbed is really critical for their reproduction. Next up, another group staying with a certain trend of critters that provide pollination, soil health, and pest control are soldier beetles. You've probably seen the adults with these leathery wing covers on flowers midsummer especially, and they're very noticeable in the fall. This particular species in this picture, the orange and black species is really common on goldenrod and is a pretty decent pollinator of goldenrod too. So the adults feed on nectar and pollen. Some are also predaceous, but their larvae are really voracious predators. So hunting insect eggs, um, caterpillars. They'll also feed on larger prey like slugs. Up next are lady beetles. These are really well known for their pest control abilities, even observed way back in medieval times. Um, they are really important in pest control. They'll eat crop pests like aphids and mealybugs, scales, mites, whiteflies, and more. Their predators are, or excuse me, their larvae are predators and the adults too, but the adults will also feed on nectar and pollen at times of the year when prey is low. So that's really important for egg production. Pollen can help support their egg production. And when lady beetles are laying their eggs amongst prey, because they like to sneak in and lay their eggs amid a colony of like aphids, for example, they will seek that aphid colony in a landscape where there's plenty of flowering plants available because they know how important flowering plants are to their offspring. And that's a similar story for lacewings too. They rely on pollen and nectar too as adults when prey is on the downswing. Lacewings are named for these beautiful, delicate, lacy wings. They have a soft body, they have beautiful golden eyes, and really, really long antennae. And the adults can be predaceous, but it's the larvae that are really, again, fast moving and voracious, sometimes known as aphid lions. And this is a group that overwinters as adults, so they're very active in the fall and in the spring when some other predators are on the way out. Similar to lady beetles, the adults do overwinter, and so they'll overwinter in leaf layers or in bark crevices, and we'll talk again more about leaves in just a minute and how important they are. Next up in our coverage of predators are fireflies. These are very familiar insects. They're also known as lightning bugs, depending on your region. They're a very familiar sight this time of year for where I'm based. They also have soft, leathery wing covers as adults. They have luminescent abdominal segments as adults, and all larvae also have those luminescent abdominal segments. Some of the species fly at night, and then they flash those luminescent segments to attract mates. Others actually don't flash at night or during the day and are active during the day and rely on pheromones to find a mate instead. The larvae, in contrast, are very active and searching for prey. They are amazing at tracking down prey. So they'll search soil burrows to find earthworms, or they will follow slime trails to find slugs and snails. And even though they're quite small in size, they can tackle much larger prey like earthworms or slugs or snails. So pretty impressive hunters also. And you can find out more about firefly conservation through our Firefly Atlas organization. All right, next up are ground beetles. And this is a very diverse group of beetles, which is saying something because beetles as an order are extremely diverse. This group of beetles are predatory as larvae and as adults. And you can see the top picture of the adult feeding on a caterpillar in the bottom picture and a larva eating a snail. They'll eat all sorts of prey like slugs and snails and smaller insects as well. So they're very important in pest control in crops and for ornamental plants as well. Some also eat weed seeds conveniently, and some also contribute to decomposition. So this is a really important group ecologically. They are long-lived and they are sensitive to disturbances in the soil where they overwinter. So tillage can impact their populations, and insecticides too. It can take them longer to recover just because they only have one generation a year and they're longer lived. So aphids can bounce back quickly from insecticide exposure, but longer lived insects like ground beetles take quite a number of years in some cases. And fun fact, if you're digging in your yard and you encounter a ground beetle, sometimes they'll play dead. They'll just, and if you just watch and wait, they'll stir up and skitter off, but it's pretty fun to watch. Okay, next up are ants. This is a group that plays a lot of different roles in food webs. They can eat small arthropods. They can decompose plants and animals. They feed on fungi. They feed on sap. Um, Ecologically, also, they can be very beneficial for dispersing seeds and as predators. What they're extremely well known for is their soil health contributions because they are what's known as ecosystem engineers because they move pounds and pounds and pounds of soil every year. Ants will form social colonies. So one individual, the queen ant that reproduces, and then lots of worker ants within the colony that have specific roles to build or to tend young or to defend the nest. And these colonies can be very large and extensive in soil. So that's why they end up moving so much soil. But this means that they integrate nutrients, they allow water and air to move deeper into soil. They keep soils healthy, essentially. All that being said, there are some species of introduced ants that are significant pests, like red imported fire ants and Argentinian ants, just to be aware of those. This next group are parasitoid wasps. And this is a huge diversity of wasps, some of which are pretty small and hard to see. These wasps lay their eggs on or within their insect or arthropod hosts, and sometimes they paralyze the host in order to be successful. But the short story is that their larvae go on to feed on their host and keep it alive until they complete their development, at which point the host dies. So, unlike parasites like ticks or mosquitoes that harm their host but don't kill them, parasitoids ultimately kill their host no matter what. And it's actually kind of a hard thing to be a parasitoid. You have to find your host, you have to get your egg inside or on your host, and then you have to somehow keep your host alive while you're eating it from the inside out. So they've developed very species specific mechanisms to do all these things. And that means that they're very host specific. Different species parasitize different insects or different life stages of different insects, like targeting eggs and some targeting larvae and so forth. Because they're so targeted, they're really very valuable in pest control because, again, um, they lead to death. So, but just to kind of put in perspective the diversity of this group, it's multiple families of wasps, but it could be the most diverse group of insects. Beetle scientists are probably shaking their heads right now, but I think hymenopterists uh, would contest it because we're finding new species all the time, and it's suspected that for every single insect species on the planet, there is a parasitoid that feeds on it, including other parasitoid wasps that have their own parasitoid wasps. So it's really mind-blowing. And short story though, because they're so small and sometimes enigmatic, it's easier to see the evidence of their work than it is to see them sometimes. Some are larger and you can see them on flowers drinking nectar, but other times really you can just see what they're doing at work in your garden. So it could be like the pupal cases that you see on this caterpillar here. Those are wasps that are probably going to emerge as adults soon. And then this milkweed leaf, has a bunch of what's known as aphid mummies. on this leaf. So those brown shells that are kind of circular, those are all the bodies of an aphid uh, that hosted a parasitoid wasp. So look for those in your habitat. And then our last group today are not insects, they are arachnids, of course, insect relatives. Um, these are spiders, and they have 8 legs instead of 6, 2 body regions instead of 3. They have multiple eyes, anywhere from 6 to 8, sometimes more eyes, and they have chelicera, which help them to dig and also to inject venom, which can paralyze or kill or start to digest their prey. So spiders are predatory throughout their life. Hunting spiders will actively hunt their prey, and there's 2 groups that you see here that are hunting spiders, the wolf spiders on the bottom and jumping spiders on the top. And they will chase down prey in leaf litter, on soil, or sometimes in plants. And then you have a lot of other spiders that are sit and wait, predators like crab spiders on flowers, or web builders that have different web building strategies to snare insects or other animals and then consume them. So insects will paralyze their, or excuse me, spiders will paralyze their prey and then inject digestive fluids to start to break them down. They're really important in pest control. They're also really important as food for larger wildlife, like for birds. And this is another group that can be long-lived, a couple years um, for their life cycle, and with just one generation, though, growing season, it can mean that it takes their populations a lot of time to recover from disturbances. All right, I'll turn it back to Aaron now to talk about how to monitor these groups.
Great. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Okay, so now that we've had that really fantastic overview of some of the groups that you might see in your garden habitat, let's talk a little bit about how to find them. What the best ways to discover who's using your habitat. And I want to stress that this can be a continuum. You can be super casual about this, or you can be really scientific, or somewhere in between. So honestly, what I do a lot of is casual observation. So I'll take my coffee out into the garden in the morning and stand there for 5 or 10 minutes and just see who's buzzing around, see who's visiting flowers. Most of you might already experience this, but I'm always amazed at how little insects care about my presence when I'm kind of standing there still and just observing. So if you want to start with that, that's a great way to first kind of dip your toes in and see who's using your garden. But if you want to be a little bit more formal about this, you can then start to record your observations in a notebook or a spreadsheet on your computer. You can use your smartphone or a camera to take photos of the insects you're seeing. This can help you a lot then when you're using ID resources like field guides and online websites, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And you can also then consider contributing your observations to iNaturalist or another community science project. So for more formal monitoring, going beyond those casual observations, you want to do something that's standardized and repeatable throughout the season and also year after year. That way you can kind of accurately compare numbers over time. You might think that you've been seeing fewer, or I guess hopefully more butterflies, for example, in your yard. And anecdotally, that might be true, but it's really good to be able to compare and look at the data that you've recorded over the years and say, yeah, over the past 3 years, 4 years, I've seen more painted ladies in my yard, for example. And here at Xerces, we have some beneficial insect scouting guides that walk through how to look for and how to count beneficial insects. And we'll drop the links into the chat at the end. And I think Rachel will also send out an email with all of the links we talk about today afterwards. But these are geared a little bit more towards habitat in hedgerows, farms, kind of more working landscapes, but a lot of the principles still apply to home gardens. You might need to use shorter transects, but as long as you kind of monitor those same transects or monitoring spots, you can compare your observations over time. And I guess I should note, I'll be using this term in the next few slides. A transect is just a straight line across a landscape that you use to kind of standardize your ecological observations. So if you have a measuring tape, you can just lay it down and use that as your transect that you walk along. So an easy way to monitor for natural enemies, as well as other invertebrates like herbivores that might be using your plants, is using what's called a beat sheet. So you can make an at-home version by putting a sheet of white 8.5 by 11 computer paper on a clipboard. And then the idea is that you hold it underneath plants and you hit that plant about 10 times with a ruler or a stick, and then you'll dislodge the insects that are or invertebrates that are on that plant, and you can then see what species or different groups of insects you find and count how many there are. So again, if you have space in your yard, in your habitat, setting up several short transects that you walk and do this as you go is a really great idea. Try to do this for about the same amount of time each time you walk your transect. It might depend on how dense your habitat is, how many plants you have, but trying to again make that standardized so that you can compare those observations over time is really important. And if you have a really small habitat with just a few plants, or if you have potted plants on a balcony, for example, you can kind of select monitoring spots instead. And again, it's just important that you monitor those same spots, those same plants throughout the season. And it's also a really good idea when you're doing monitoring in general to record the weather, record the wind, the temperature, cloud cover, because these are all going to impact insect activity. And in general, trying to sample on kind of sunny, warm, and relatively still days is always a really great goal. Here, I went into my yard and I did a little beat sheet. I think I mostly got plant debris, but maybe a few little invertebrates, but it's kind of fun to do and see what you find. So for monitoring flowers, you similarly want to set up some transects across your yard. And another alternative, if you have more patchy habitat, is to set up meter squared plots. So just a square that's a meter by meter on each side. And you can sit at each of those meter squared plots and do a 5-minute observation. And either whether you do meter squared plots or a transect, the goal is just to see who's visiting the flowers. And again, whatever you do, the goal is repeatability so you can compare your measurements over time. And we recommend doing this kind of in the middle part of the day for pollinators in particular, around 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. range. And again, recording the weather is really important because that really can influence insect activity. Bees can be really hard to identify on the wing, so it's okay to group them into categories like bumblebee, honeybee, green bee, other native bee. For other insects, our scouting guide sheet, I think it has syrphid fly, beetle, predatory wasp, soldier beetle, lacewing, ambush bug. You'll probably recognize these because Jennifer just went through them a few slides ago. But as you get more used to this and you start using some ID resources, you'll begin to be able to identify more groups and might be able to ID them further, which is really great as well. And you can always ID pollinators in more detail. If you have an insect net and some plastic vials, you can catch insects and then chill them in a cooler with an ice pack so that they slow down and it's a lot easier to look at them and take photos for kind of further in-depth ID. And our Bumblebee Atlas protocol has more detail on how to do this if this is something that's of interest to you. And again, we can share that afterwards. Okay, so then we have soil-dwelling insects. And the easiest way to monitor for these really cool invertebrates at home is creating what are called pitfall traps. So these are just little catch and release traps. You can make them from something like a plastic drinking cup or a yogurt container. And the idea is that you dig a hole that the containers can fit in, and then you put them out in late afternoon or early evening, and the insects will fall in and you can see what you've caught the next morning. If you keep the lid on while you're placing it, it can prevent soil from spilling into the trap, which is really nice. And once you've kind of got it positioned and snug, you can then remove the lid. And when you come back, you can take photos for identification. And we have this soil scouting guide that you can fill out to kind of record. There's a worksheet, or you can make your own observations in a notebook or computer spreadsheet. And you also want to do this when it's warm and in locations with full sun. You don't want to do this when rain is forecasted because then it can fill the traps, which you obviously don't want. So this is a little bit different, but you can also monitor your habitat itself. We have a checklist that goes through some of the elements of good pollinator habitat, like percent of the site with flowering vegetation, how much native vegetation you have, plant diversity by season, whether you have different types of nesting resources, pesticide use, or I guess should say, hopefully lack thereof, and then also different types of community action that you can take. And you certainly don't need to do this. Pollinator gardening can be casual, but a lot of people are really interested in tracking their habitat and seeing where they can improve it and what changes they can make. And this is a really good way to do that. Okay, so I also wanted to spend a slide talking about how to identify some of the insects that you are finding. And I'm sorry, this photo kind of got higher up than I intended, kind of covering the title slide there. But depending on the insect and how deep down the identification rabbit hole you want to go, you might be identifying them to groups, like the ones that Jennifer showed us earlier, or in some cases you can get to species if that's something you're interested in. There's published field guides that you can purchase from local retailers or wherever you buy your books. I know the Kaufman one is a really good one, for example. But here at Xerces, we have some guides that are really helpful. I can show you some of these now. Our Bumblebee Atlas team has some great ID resources for bumblebees for all parts of the country. We also have some general natural enemy group guides. We have this fantastic pocket ID guide to invertebrates of urban soils, for example. And again, I can link these Xerces resources for you at the end. Um, but insect ID can also be really regional. So we encourage you to check with your local university extension program for resources that are more local to you. Your local master gardener hotlines are often really useful. They can help ID insects that you find, as well as state diagnostic labs are often really great resources as well. There's also wonderful online resources. Bugguide.net, for example, is a really detailed online resource that has reference photos and even short keys to help you kind of key out and identify different insect groups. iNaturalist is another good one. There's a community of experts that will help ID your observations. And I also want to note that simple online searches can be really helpful. I've had great luck, at least getting started with where to go by Googling things like orange caterpillar Oregon, and then kind of going from there and comparing my photos. Social media groups can also be a great starting point to point you in the right direction, like local gardening or naturalist Facebook groups. So these are some ideas of where to get started with your kind of insect identification journey. And now I'll turn it back over to Jennifer.
Thanks, Aaron. I'm just going to give a couple examples that illustrate some of the things Aaron was just talking about. This particular case study is known as the Square Meter Project. This was undertaken by Chris Hauser, who is the conservation director in Nebraska for the Nature Conservancy. And he decided in 2018 to take a square meter of a restored prairie and photograph all the life that he saw within that 1 year across the seasons. And he found about 120 species that he photographed. It was burned in 2024, and he found his flags again and was inspired to do it again. So he took another year and photographed throughout that year. Sometimes every day, sometimes twice a day. So he found over 300 species in 1 square meter, just an astounding diversity of life in a small space. Almost 30 plants, 20 spiders, 20 moths and butterflies, 41 species of beetles, 55 fly species, and so forth. So just an amazing diversity in this small space. And it was meant to be an educational experience for him and also a learning opportunity for everybody else. And it ended up being pretty inspirational. This is something like Aaron described. You don't have to recreate if you're not a professional photographer, but you can just make visual observations within that space. And there's a surprising amount happening in small spaces. Another quick example, we have a Xerces volunteer based in New Mexico, and he has been tracking the life of in his yard. He takes photographs and then he submits them to iNaturalist. As Aaron mentioned, there are experts there that will identify those species, and so far he's found over 2,000 species in his yard, not just of insects, but of all life forms. But it's pretty impressive. um, Now, it also doesn't have to be as formal as Aaron mentioned. It can be, you can keep it pretty simple. You can keep a list and looking for your patterns, sit outside and jot down some notes. Maybe this is something that you're observing behavior wise, or a song, um, or visitations on a plant and how they might differ between years. You can add sketches, you can add photos, or you can just keep written notes. And really, it can be whatever you want it to be. It can be formal if you want to net things and tag them, or you can keep it much more casual and sit outside watching dragonflies with popcorn, for example. Whatever scale of bug watching you enjoy, it can be right outside your door. And really, it's all made possible by habitat. So, really quickly, we're going to review some of the things that can help support diversity of insects in your space. And just to reiterate what Aaron mentioned earlier, habitat on all sorts of scales is very valuable for pollinators and other insects, including habitat in your space, even if it's potted plants on a balcony. Insects can work with that. But really, plants are the foundation, and that means that it's really beneficial for insects to prioritize native plants. Native plants support more species of insects and a larger abundance of insects, and that's important for food webs and supporting other wildlife. So to support as many insects as possible, you can have a succession of blooms throughout the season. So you've got something blooming in the spring, throughout the fall. That's important for um, pollen specialist bees that are out just for a short period of time, and also bumblebees, which are out for the entire growing season. You can vary plants with different structures. So open flowers like the fall sunflower in the middle there, that's really beneficial for beetles and wasps, which do not have long mouth parts, so they can access the nectar and pollen, whereas the penstemon right next to it is really great for bumblebees and butterflies that do have longer tongues. Host plants specific for butterflies and moths are good to consider, so you can support those caterpillar life cycles. Grasses, native grasses provide shelter and overwintering habitat, and we'll talk a little bit more about nesting materials for bees in just a minute. When you're thinking about all these different types of plants, whether they're trees or grasses or wildflowers, you want to make sure they're going to be successful in your space. So matching the moisture levels that the plants need to what you receive, what kinds of sun you have, and soil as well. That's just really critical for their health and their growth. And then lastly, when you are purchasing plants that have been grown without long-lasting insecticides, so that they are not exposing pollinators unintentionally to those chemicals. It's important to prioritize straight natives when you can and avoid native cultivars. Not all native cultivars are a problem. Some are very beneficial, but sometimes cultivars and varieties they can be bred for showiness, and so they can look beautiful to us, but have lost the ability to produce pollen and nectar. So they're not supporting pollinators or anything else that visits flowers for pollen and nectar. In addition to food sources from flowering plants, these insects that we talked about today need places for shelter and overwintering. So we talked a lot about the soil layer and the leaf layer for overwintering. Some also overwinter in clumps of bunch grass. Bees, of course, use stems or they nest underground. So all these elements are important to think about when you're thinking about habitat for pollinators and other insects. And specifically, the leaf layer we mentioned earlier, it's really critical for providing habitat for all sorts of animals on the soil surface. Specifically, it's used for overwintering for things like lady beetles and lacewings and some different life stages, the pupa stage or caterpillar stage of butterflies and moths, and many other groups. So leaves are habitat. And if you have leaves that fall on your lawn, you can rake them up, put them into your underneath a tree or shrub, put them on a garden bed, let them do their thing throughout the winter. And not only are they providing shelter, they will decompose and contribute nutrients to your soil as well. And then we have our stems. Um, Bees that nest above ground, that nest in stems, will use the stems of plants that have a hollow center, so some sunflowers, for example, or they'll excavate the pith inside um, shrubs like roses or raspberries or sumacs, and then nest within those stems. So leaving your stems is an important step to help support them as well. So what this looks like in practice is the stems that are going right now that in this illustration are coneflowers, that you leave those through the winter, or at least some intact through the winter. So you can leave the seed heads for goldfinches and other birds. In the spring, you'll come back and you'll prune those stems. You can prune them to 8 inches or higher if you have the capacity to do that. That just leaves plenty of room for more cells for an individual bee larva. So the longer that you have, the more potential there is within that stem. And then by cutting it, that gives the bee access to the center of the stem or to the pith, and they can then excavate, lay their eggs, provision their nest, and so forth. And then that older stem will just persist throughout the growing season. Um, then there'll be a new stem that grows. Those will be the ones that you leave over the winter. And then the next spring, bees will emerge and then occupy the newly cut stems that you leave for them. So that's the process. It can mean a mind shift for gardeners who are used to cleaning up in the fall, but it's actually delightful to not clean up in the fall. You can do it in the spring, and overall, it just leaves a lot more shelter in your garden in a lot of different ways, not just for bees, but for other insects that are using that vegetation. Oh, it's back to you, Aaron. Sorry, let me go back.
There we go. And let me unmute. Great. Thank you, Jennifer. So I know we're getting a little close on time here, so I'll try to get through these slides kind of quickly. But since I'm on the pesticide reduction team, I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't kind of add some pesticide reduction slides into this talk. So when you're observing or monitoring your habitat, you're going to undoubtedly also find herbivores or even pest insects. And that's okay. I want to first stress that herbivores aren't necessarily pests. And here's an example that I've seen a lot in my own yard that I really love to see. So you see these little discs cut out of the leaf margin on these leaves, and these aren't feeding damage actually. They're actually leafcutter bees who will take these circular discs that they snip from leaves back to their nests, and they line the inside of their nests with them. So they're a really exciting thing to see for me. But even when it is feeding damage, herbivores, as Jennifer was telling us earlier, are important parts of the ecosystem. They provide food for all sorts of other insects and animals like birds. And what's more, healthy plants can tolerate a lot of feeding damage without actually being at risk. So especially in pollinator habitat, you're unlikely to need to do anything to actively manage pests. You'll also have all of these beneficial insects that we've been learning about today, helping keep pest populations in check. And I think on that note, as we talk about pests, it's important to note that about 98% of insects aren't what we would consider pests. And this might catch you by surprise a little bit because it seems like pest insects get a lot of attention, but only an estimated 2% of all insects cause economic damages or health damages to people. And the rest are so vital as food for other species, recycling nutrients, pest control, and pollination. But as Rachel Carson once said, yet most of the chemicals now used to kill all insects are friends and enemies alike. So something that I think is really important to kind of think about and understand on this topic of natural enemies and pesticides is that, in our diverse yard habitats, pests will largely be suppressed by these natural enemies. These, again, are the predators and parasitoids that we've been talking about that feed on them. But pests often have really short life cycles and can reproduce quickly. Think about mosquitoes, which can complete their life cycle in as few as 5 to 10 days. But on the other hand, we have predators and parasitoids, which tend to have longer life cycles. And what that means when we would talk about pesticides is that if you do use a pesticide in your yard, you'll likely kill most of the insects living there, unfortunately. But pests will recover much faster because of these quick life cycles and often have a population explosion because there's no natural enemies to keep them in check because their populations take a lot longer to recover. So protecting garden habitat from pesticides isn't just about making sure the product you're buying at the store doesn't, have a warning sign about bees. Really, the first most important step is not considering pesticide products to be your first line of defense if you have an unwanted plant or insect in your yard. And especially in yards and gardens, and especially pollinator habitat, we really would like to see the elimination of pesticide use, especially for cosmetic concerns. And this is a presentation, multiple presentations all by itself. And we have a lot of resources on this if you want to reach out. We'll also send some in the links afterwards. But to do this, you should manage your yard to prevent pests. And a lot of it is making sure your plants are healthy, as Jennifer was mentioning by making sure they're planted in locations where they'll grow well with appropriate sun and appropriate amounts of moisture for the specific plant species. And then the next step is if you do get pests, before intervening, get an identification. Confirm that the insect you found really is a pest. And if it is a pest insect, if it really is causing a problem. Oftentimes, it's, again, just an issue cosmetically, and it can be ignored or it can be managed in ways without any pesticides. So if you do determine that you need to manage something in the garden, seek out non-chemical management before reaching for pesticides. And I know that it can take time to kind of build resilience and learn about these non-chemical solutions, but eventually this is what we'd encourage everybody to do. And we have a lot of resources in our Xerces library, and again, there are more localized resources you can find as well through local extension services and gardening groups and resources like that. A pollinator garden is going to be chewed on, it's going to be munched on, it's going to have this lived in look, and I think that's wonderful. Ultimately, it means your yard is being used by this amazing community of insects, birds, other organisms, and little nibbles like this are signs of a really vibrant and successful habitat. So I want to remind you that we have all sorts of great Xerces resources available for free at our Xerces library on our website, including information on the topics we covered today. So I encourage you to go check out our library. You can search by different topics and categories. Here's an example of some of the great resources that you can find there. I also wanted to plug this landing page, the Plants for Pollinators page that links to many other resources. Encourage you to check this one out as well. And again, we can send this link to you so you don't have to quickly copy it down. And then I also want to give a quick plug for a new resource that's coming soon. This is an interactive monarch plant finder, which is going to help you find native host and nectar plants for monarchs, and it will help connect users to local native plant vendors that have these plants. So I think this is going to be a really great resource coming soon, July 2026. So just next month. And yeah, thank you all again for being with us, for being here during Pollinator Week. Here's Jennifer and my emails. If you have any follow-up questions or thoughts, please feel free to reach out. And I know we're right at the hour here, but for anybody who wants to stay later, I think we have time for a little bit of questions here.
Thank you so much to both of you. I loved this presentation and learned so much. So just as a reminder, can you please put your questions in the Q&A feature instead of the chat? It helps me keep things a little bit more organized. So we're gonna jump right into this first question. And I get this question a lot because it's not super straightforward about saving the stems. How do you know when insects have emerged from hibernation inside the flower stems and that it's safe to cut them back?
Yeah, that's a great question. Different species emerge at different times. So sometimes the way I approach it in my garden is just taking a little while to clean things up in the spring, kind of spreading it across a month or two. Um, or then if I do cut a stem, then moving it to a specific location so that if anything hasn't emerged yet, they can still emerge before it gets composted. Or sometimes those stems just spend their time there the whole summer. So that's the approach that I take. But it's not always, in some ways, I guess I should also preface this with the stem that you leave up is sometimes not used by bees from that growing season. It will be used by bees the next growing season. So by trimming it back, you're just giving them access. Um, but there are still things within your stems too. So it's yeah, it's a bit of a balancing act all the way around.
Yeah, I often just, when I cut them back, I'll cut them to like, 6 to 18 inches or, in there. And a lot of the plants that I do have in my yard that are kind of save the stem type plants, as soon as the new growth starts coming, they're just covered and you can't even see them. So I end up just kind of letting them decompose there. I don't even really cut them back farther. So
Yeah, I do the same. I've just sort of left them and I just don't ever cut them back. All right, this next question. What do wasp larvae look like and how do they turn into adult wasps?
Yeah. They look a little bit like bee larvae, which are like a little bit like a grub in some ways. I mean, they all have sort of unique individual structure, but they are usually legless, um, and they're within a cell, so within a nest usually, or they're next to um, their prey, and so they don't need to travel to find their food. It's right there. So their job is after the wasp lays its eggs or after the bee lays its eggs, that they just eat the food around them as quickly as possible. So within a couple weeks, and then they enter a resting phase, either as the pupa or as the last larval stage before they become a pupa. So they don't look like much, and it's really hard to see them because they're within the nest, either underground or within their nest. But that's how they turn into adult wasps. They enter that pupal phase, and then when it's time for them to emerge as an adult, they've rearranged all their body tissues and they move from this grub legless like phase into this amazing adult that has wings and can fly and has amazing capacity to detect their prey. It's a crazy process.
Thank you, Jennifer. All right, the next question is what is the definition of a non-beneficial insect? It's a funny question. I like it.
Yeah. Aaron, do you mind if I just take the first part and you take kind
please
of
do.
build
Yeah,
on?
no, jump in,
Okay.
Jennifer. Yeah.
This is a great question, and we use beneficial insects broadly. Um, I think to designate that insects are all out there playing roles that are valuable, and that we also use it specifically to describe predators and parasitoids that contribute to crop pest control and to pest control. So there's sort of those two uses, the broad use and then the more specific use. But overall, most insects are playing really critical roles in the ecosystem or are directly beneficial to our life. So, um, and you can make cases for those that have populations that become an issue and damage plants or cause health risks, that they also have their own role to play in ecosystems. So that's where I'll let Aaron take over.
Yeah, I think that's a really good answer, Jennifer. And I think it is hard because it's like, oh, by labeling these ones beneficial and these ones not beneficial, it's like imposing our own. Like all insects, end up playing roles in the ecosystem and can be, great and beneficial. I think something important to remember is that the idea of a pest really is kind of a human construct, something. Um, one example we'll use is, mice in the woods or in nature are great, totally fine. Mice in our houses eating our food, not so much. Then it kind of becomes a pest. So it is in some ways kind of this context specific, um, yeah, kind of term. So I would argue, and that's what I kind of try to stress when I'm mentioning that, you know, herbivores eating your plants, not necessarily a pest. It becomes a pest when it's causing these kind of, what we'd call economic or health issues for people. But yeah, that's a really good question.
It's a great follow-up to that, probably for both of you, but what is the best resource to use to determine if an insect, for example, a cucumber beetle, is really a problem?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And again, it's so context specific. So, what we would say in some context is having thresholds, right? Where, above this level, you can accept the damage it's causing up to a certain point. And what that certain point is going to kind of depend on, what plant we're talking about, whether you're a farmer or just a home gardener. For habitat plants, my threshold would be very, very high, because you're planting these for habitat. Sometimes insects might be using plants in ways you don't necessarily like, but that's okay because it's, part of this ecosystem. If you have, tomatoes, for example, or you're gardening, obviously that threshold might be different. If an insect is eating all of the, your broccoli or all of your tomatoes or something, then there might be a level where you say, okay, this is above the threshold that is acceptable to me. I'm going to take action. So I think with the cucumber beetle in this question, just having a few cucumber beetles, that itself isn't an issue. They might be at a low level that's being kept in check by natural enemies, by those predators and parasitoids, and not really causing much of an issue. But if they're, defoliating or eating all of your cucumbers, causing issues, then you might want to look into some of these, hopefully first non-chemical management strategies, and see if there's a way to kind of address the cucumber beetle issue.
Thank you, Aaron. All right, this next question is about aphids. Are aphids a pest? I know that lady beetles and ants eat them. What do you think about using a very dilute solution of dish detergent? I'm not seeing nearly as many lady beetles or other insects this year. We have been very hot and dry. And I sort of have two questions to piggyback off of that we get often is how do you attract lady beetles to your garden? And is it helpful to buy them at the store to bring them in?
Maybe I'll let Aaron tackle the aphid portion of that question, but just to start with the lady beetle portion, attracting them to your garden can mean having flowering plants, especially things that bloom late in the fall and early in the spring, is really valuable because they do overwinter as adults, and so they need food. And oftentimes prey is lower at those times of the year, and so that's why pollen is so important, and nectar too. So having things that bloom in those two times of the year is really good. And then some form of shelter for them to overwinter. So for many native species, it's um, layers of leaves or within bark crevices or just some habitat that's not disturbed. So within crop settings, of course, where you have, or at least cropped fields, you have this annual cycle where you do tillage and so forth. That means that lady beetles have to come and go and need to survive outside of the crop. But in your garden, if you have these habitat elements, they can live there year round. Um, Buying and purchasing lady beetles and releasing them in your garden is usually less successful. Those lady beetles are bred in a lab. They have no site fidelity. When they get out of their package, they're just glad to be free. So they have no reason to necessarily stick to your site um, in the quantities that you might need to control whatever you're hoping to control in that area. They'll disperse to find their preferred prey in their preferred area. So having habitat to support populations in your space is really the best approach. Um, there's been some success if you have a greenhouse where you can release lady beetles, but that's different because they're confined and they can't leave at that point. So um, okay, so but then alternative prey, lady beetles will eat plenty of aphids that are not harming plants. So I'll turn it over to Aaron for that.
That's a great answer, Jennifer. Thank you for covering that, lady beetles. Yeah, so aphids, can be a pest, but again, kind of like we were saying, things are context dependent. I think something to consider with aphids is that they almost never really cause, a problem to the point that the plant is, at risk. And there's ways to, when you do have a big aphid infestation, to deal with it in non-chemical ways. I've had a lot of great success just hitting them with a jet of water from a hose. It'll knock the aphids off, and they're not able to crawl back up onto the plant. So I'd suggest that first. If you have an aphid infestation that you want to deal with, try just knocking them off with a jet of water from the hose. I would caution against using things like, even dilute dish soap. Dish soap is not designed as any type of an insecticide. It's designed to strip grease and oil, so it will strip the protective layers off of insects and kill them, but it will also kind of damage or strip away the protective waxy layer on leaves and can cause damage. So it's kind of one of those things. Just because a product is familiar to us, we have dish soap in our house, doesn't necessarily mean it's something that you should use in the garden, and especially with something like an aphid that you can control with knocking off with water. I would suggest that as a first step.
Okay, a follow-up question to the lady beetles. Are Asian lady beetles okay to leave in the garden?
Ooh, that's a complex thing to figure out. They are an introduced species. They definitely play a role in pest control. They also can eat the larvae of other native lady beetles. So it's a real mixed bag. But if you do grow soybeans, then they are your best friend, because they consume soybean aphids like no other.
Thank you. Another question, do you leave any naturalized plants such as Queen Anne's lace or dandelions in your garden?
I definitely have lots of dandelions.
I was going to say, yeah, I definitely have dandelions and other. I think I try to remove all of the invasive, not native plants from my yard, because they'll take over, number one. But for things like some random dandelions, I definitely don't worry too much about those.
Yeah, and it's also okay to grow some non-native plants too. I don't want to suggest that there's no room for non-native plants, because they do have benefits also, for pollinators. It's just that it's already quite common to be able, and people are very familiar with geraniums and so forth. So those are much more accessible, and native plants haven't yet had their moment in which they're widely available and widely known. And they do have such a foundational ecological role. But that doesn't mean that having some non-native plants in your yard that you enjoy is unacceptable. You can absolutely have those.
Thank you for that. All right, this next question I appreciate because I'm actually having the same problem here in Montana. This person lives in Central Valley, California, and they're having a big problem with snails and slugs. Any advice on beneficial predators to attract? Currently, they're just collecting as many as possible, which I imagine is quite the chore.
Yeah, that's a great question. Jennifer, do you have suggestions on specific, good snail and slug predators? I'm trying to think off the top of my head.
Ground beetles
Yeah.
are top notch, also soldier beetles and fireflies. So all of those need some sort of habitat that's more permanent. So outside of a cropped area, for example, like uh, ground beetles overwinter in clumps of grass, so they need something that's raised up from the grass a little bit, or up from the ground, excuse me, so it's not super moist during the winter time. So that might be an element to consider adding in, but those are very diverse beetle groups. So I'm guessing you do have plenty of options in the Central Valley. It's just kind of tweaking the habitat to support them. But good on you for putting in the work. Oh, and rove beetles too. We didn't talk about those, but there are a lot of beetle predators and spiders sometimes.
Thank you, Jennifer. All right, this question has come up a lot this year about roaches specifically and how to treat for them. This person is wondering if a powder targeted into the eaves of the home is reasonable. They want to support insects in their garden and yard, but need to address the roaches indoors. What's a reasonable approach?
Yeah, that's a hard one, and it's hard to answer without knowing specific roach species, locations, context, things like that. So if you want to follow up, feel free to send me an email, and I can maybe answer this in more detail or talk to some of my colleagues. I think in general, one of the issues with roaches is there's generally likely a pretty large population in the surrounding area. So any spraying that you perform is maybe going to temporarily knock down a population in your yard, but there'll be new individuals that just move in. So one of the things that we talk about a lot, especially with pests that get into houses, roaches, ants, things like that, are both prevention and sanitation. So prevention, just trying to make sure there's no areas where they can kind of, and I know it's tricky with roaches because they're able to kind of find their way in through little gaps, but making sure that any cracks are caulked, any gaps in doors are kind of filled, things like that, just to try to prevent their ability to come inside. And then sanitation, I think, is going to have a really big impact. And again, it depends on the roach species, but making sure garbage cans are tightly sealed. Compost piles can be a really big source of kind of, I guess, attractiveness to cockroaches. So making sure that composting is in a bin that can seal to exclude cockroaches, and then also reducing moisture sources because many cockroach species are attracted to moisture. So these are all non-chemical ways you can try to reduce the attractiveness of your yard and your house to cockroaches. But yeah, other than that, I don't want to give super specific recommendations. But yeah, feel free to follow up with an email if you have more questions.
All right, and just two more questions. This next one's hopefully pretty quick. Where can people get native plants?
Yeah, one of the links that Rachel added to the chat is our Plants for Pollinators page, and it has a native plants and seed suppliers directory. So it has nationwide information about suppliers near you. So you can search for a plant provider near you that will provide native plants. And we're still building that directory. So there are plant providers out there that are not currently in there that we'd love to get into that directory to raise them up, but that's where I would start. You can also check with, sometimes every state has a native plant provider organization that you can search for, or you could ask somebody within the Native Plant Society within a state as well if you for a recommendation. So those are some options.
Thank you, Jennifer. All right, so we have time for one more question. I do want to note lots of folks have asked if this presentation is going to be recorded because they want to share it out. It will be on our YouTube channel by the end of the day. And if you just go to Google and search YouTube Xerces Society, our channel will pop up, and this should be in the featured column or in the webinar series column as well. So this last question, really appreciate your definition of beneficial insects. I see that we've gone down the pest route. So Aaron, but what are your recommendations regarding invasive insects like Japanese beetles, lanternflies? I know that this is a really complicated, both of those are very complicated as are most really invasive insects that we're dealing with.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And unfortunately, it's hard to paint in broad brushstrokes because the management techniques for different invasive species are going to be very different. But in general, we're still Don't recommend you use insecticide applications because even those might, kill the Japanese beetle population briefly. It's also going to impact all the beneficial insects that live in your yard as well. And the management strategies for, again, these different insects are going to be different. So if you have a specific question, feel free to reach out with an email. I will say that some of these like lanternflies and Japanese beetles, depending on where you are in the country, they've been established for quite some time, and it's something that people kind of have to live with and manage. But then in other places, they might be an emerging pest, or there might be other species. Here in Oregon, we just had the emerald ash borer found the last couple of years. So if you do find something that's an emerging pest that's just kind of arrived in your area, definitely contacting your state Department of Agriculture for advice and to report it. That's really, really important to do. But yeah, unfortunately, it's hard to kind of do a one-size-fits-all recommendation for all of these different invasive insect species that we find here. But yeah, that's a really great question.
And I just mentioned one thing about Japanese beetles. I don't have any experience with lanternflies, but Japanese beetles, you can knock them into a dish of soapy water, and they do have this trick where if they see a shadow coming, then they'll just drop off the plant to try to protect themselves, and sometimes they'll fly away. But if you position your bowl right underneath them and then kind of hover your hand above, they'll drop off themselves into your bowl. It's more labor intensive for sure. But if you have a plant that they're really attracted to, like rose bushes, that's a way to sort of control the damage.
That's such a good tip. I love the insider tips.
That's awesome.
Well, thank you both so much. This presentation's been wonderful. You're getting lots of love in the chat. And thank you to our audience for hanging in here with us well past the hour, and for your great questions and just the awesome work you're doing out there. We can't do it alone. Thank you for taking care of our pollinators and providing for them. Also, Aaron and Jennifer were on Bug Banter, and their episode will be released that first Tuesday of July. So if you don't know, we do have an awesome podcast. And I will say there was a tiny bit of overlap, but there's even more information in that episode. So we hope you tune in to that. It was a lot of fun. So thank you both again so much. And we hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week.